try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do.
Lot of cedar. Thank you. There were a lot of cedar pieces in the walls as well, maybe to help support against earthquakes and maybe for decorations. And another thing, the palace had storages, and in those storages, one of the rooms had huge containers a person could go in, pitas, it's called in Hebrew, full of olive oil. So you have all this petrol, all this oil burning. So the archaeological findings are totally fitting what the Bible tells us about the war of Joshua and the northern kings, and he burned Hazor itself. Now this is phrases 10 and 12, 10 and 11. First time that it mentions that Joshua burnt Hazor. Okay, again, the fractured basalt show us the heat. Okay, and we continue reading the next sentence as if it wasn't enough for the first time, that he did not burn any of the other cities except for Hazor, which he burned. Totally. The Bible says it again and again and again, because the fire was so strong. Now, you would say, okay, we have a great fire, 0.5 meter of ash, and we have the biblical sentences. It fits 1-to-1. Is there a problem here? The problem is the dating. Inside the palace, a letter from Egypt was found, which we can date to about the year 1230 BCE. Okay, we know the name of the king. We know when he sent it. 1230 years BC. So the early and when that letter was sent, there was a king in Hazor. The palace stood. It was complete. So the fire could not be any earlier than 1229. Sounds right? Unless you read the Bible and you believe it word by word by word. Now, we have King Solomon, who we know reigned about 950 BCE, and the Bible tells us specifically that he ruled 400 years after Exodus, after coming out of Egypt, which means the Exodus was in the 14th century BC. And Joshua is about 50, 60, 70 years after the Exodus, okay, because there were 40 years in the desert, and then however long it took him to conquer Jericho and the Ai in the south. Okay, so if you like many Jews and many evangelists read the Bible letter by letter, this fire, if it belongs to Joshua, has to be in the 14th century or in the 15th century BC. And now we know that it cannot be earlier than 1229, the beginning of the 13th century. So it doesn't match. And that opens an argument. Who set Hazor on fire? Now, I'm not going to solve it because the best archaeologists in Israel, the highest professors, okay, Bento on one side, Finkelstein's on the other side, they can't agree with each other, and I'm not the authority to give you a solution. I'm only going to open question marks, and I'm not going to give you an exclamation mark, and you go according to your faith and your belief. Who burnt the palace of Hazor? Was it an inside job by the Canaanites? Was it the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Philistines, the Israelites? So many options. We assume that if it was the Egyptians, they would tell us about it. They wrote everything. We know when they sent this, and we know when they conquered that, and we have it all up on the palaces, and they have all these archives. There's nothing about burning Hazor on the Egyptian side. So we can assume that it wasn't the Egyptians. Okay? It doesn't fit any of the ceramic ware, any of the findings after that don't fit Phoenicians or Philistines. An inside job of the Canaanites, a rebellion against the Canaanites, again, doesn't make any sense if we compare it to the temple renovations of before that were done with all respect to the gods, okay? And again, contrary to that, we see this ritual basin that had a head, and it was fractured to hundreds of pieces in that great fire. So we have here somebody who burnt, and we have a book says, I burned. Okay, Joshua is saying, we Israelites burned. So the obvious thing would be to put these two pieces of puzzle together, only the timing doesn't work. Only if you say that the 400 years before Solomon is something that you put in the question mark, then you can put the Joshua there. I hope I was clear enough. If you have any questions or misunderstanding. Again, more and more examples of how strong the fire is. The bricks actually melted, pottery melted and was deformed in many of the vessels. So now that the north is conquered and the palace is burnt and Yavin, the king of Hazor, is dead, then Joshua divides the land to the different tribes, and it is time for Naphtali to get its territory, and the territory touches Vulun on the south and Asher on the west and the Jordan to the east, and it has all these fortified towns. Is Hazor still fortified? It was destroyed. It had such a huge fire. Is it still fortified? Is it still a city? Are there still people living there? That's interesting. How can that be? But it's definitely mentioned in the list of the cities that the tribe of Naphtali, which we can see the territory here, got. And now we continue to the book of Judges. And we reach chapter 4. And once again, if you know the cycle of the book of Judges, we do the evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he punishes by conquering us by one of the nations around us, and then a judge comes and saves the people. Okay, and the cycle comes again and again and again. So Ehud is dead from the previous chapter, and the Israelites were put in the hands of Yavin, the king of Canaan. Notice, he's not the king of Hazor in this specific phrase. The name Hazor is not mentioned. He's the king of Canaan. He's the strongest king in the area, but the name Hazor is not mentioned. Who reigned in Hazor? You have to read the Hebrew for this. because the Hebrew says malach in the past tense, not molech in the present, not vayimloch in the upside down past present that the biblical Hebrew uses sometimes. And if you read the text in Hebrew, this verb pops out because it's the only one in the past tense while the whole chapter is in the present. So could it be that Yavin, who is the king of Canaan, his family, his dynasty used to reign sometime in Hazor, before Hazor was destroyed, before it was conquered by Joshua, which the sentence doesn't tell us. Tavo, please be quiet. And now he's somewhere else. Because if you read the battle later on, most of the battle is around the Jezreel Valley. The headquarters of Barak and Debora will be on Mount Tavo. The Sisra, the head of the army, the chief of staff, comes from Charoshet HaGoyim, which is next to Tivon of today. Debora, in the next chapter, will sing the song of victory of Debora, and she will speak about Megiddo, and she will speak about Ta'anach. It's all in the Jezreel Valley, 60 kilometers away from Hazor. Right? So, okay, Sisra, fled to Yael, the wife of Hevel, the Canaanite, and we know that there were also in the Israel Valley, in the Jezreel Valley. I have to move you aside so I can read. And on that day, God subdued Yavin, the king of Canaan. Again, not the king of Hazor, before the Israelites. And then we see here a process, and the hand of the Israelite pressed harder and harder. It's not a one-time battle. It's not the total victory, which is a phrase we hear too much on the news today. But unfortunately, a slow process. Okay? We do not hear, if we read this carefully, the story of Debora, we do not read that there was an actual battle in Hazor, that Hazor was conquered. And that might solve a biblical puzzle that we had till now. Why does Debora need to fight against Hazor if already 150 years before, Joshua has already conquered and destroyed it in that great fire? Okay? But if you read very, very carefully, you actually understand that the battle itself took place in another area in the Jezreel Valley, and Hazor itself is not affected, and Yavin was once the king of Hazor. That's one suggestion of solving this puzzle. Another suggestion is perhaps, once again, depending on how you take the biblical text as is or with criticism, perhaps the biblical writer was confused between the two events and crossed them. Perhaps what Joshua did was just fight against the army and beat the army, and maybe the great fire was in the time of Debora. And the two stories are mixed, and the story of Debora actually came before the story of Joshua. Again, there are so many opinions, and so many rabbis and so many biblical scholars are arguing about this and having very definite opinions, and I am not the one to give you, as I said, an exclamation mark, but only a question mark. What is definite, though, that the area of the palace that suffered the worst fire was not built again. When we go beyond the Bronze Age into the Iron Age and the few centuries that are left before Hazor is abandoned, you see that all the areas around the palace are built by the Israelites, by Solomon, by Achav, by Jeroboam II. You see more and more layers around here. the palace itself, that big room that we saw, that ballroom that we saw, is only the palace from the late Bronze Age and was never built again. The people coming centuries after, maybe because they had technical problems of a half a meter of ash and they thought they couldn't put construction that to be stable enough, or maybe because they thought the place was cursed. Maybe they remembered the trauma, the disaster of that specific place. And I'm sorry to everything today is a trigger. Everything you talk about, if you talk about wildflowers, if you talk about archaeology, whatever it is, everything triggers to the present. And when I think of places that were totally burnt in Israel 9.5 months ago, and the residents, those who survived, that are thinking, am I going to rebuild my house in the same location or move it maybe a few hundred meters to the side? I can understand the psychology of this. Right? So finally, after almost an hour, we leave the Bronze Age and we get into the Iron Age, first to the time of the judges before there are kings in Israel. And in the beginning, there's something totally insignificant, semi-nomadic encampments. So small stones, unhewn, in a very small area of the upper city, until we reach the time of Solomon. And Solomon makes it into a city again, like he did in many other places. And again, those of you who've been to Israel and to virtual tours have heard and read this phrase before about Solomon building the cities and fortifying Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer. And it's already the mythology of the Israel archaeology, the story how Yigael Yadin, the head archaeologist here, when he saw one corner of the gate, he stopped and he put lines on the ground. He stretched ropes and he put the nails, and he told his students, you have to dig here. And this is where you will find a passage, and this is where you're going to find 3 chambers on one side and 3 chambers on the other side. And lo and behold, they dug and they found exactly according to the measurements. And the story is that he knew the gates of Megiddo and of Gezer from before, and he knew their dimensions and their size, and he did according to that. And that is the proof that these gates were built by Solomon. As you know, in Megiddo, yet again, it's an argument and a question mark whether the gate that is called the Solomonic gate is really from Solomon or maybe from Achav. In the case of Hazor, it is more definite. The time fits and the architecture, and as you will see soon, we know what Achav built later, so this gate we can relate to Solomon. This is what it looks like from above. It's not 4 chambers. This is a tower, a guarding tower. So is this one. And the only soldiers, the protectors of the city, could go in these. And these are the 3 chambers, and the 3 chambers that are so familiar to us from Dan, from the Milo in Jerusalem, from Megiddo and Gezer, etc., and from the phrase here in Ezekiel, that there are 3 alcoves on each side and 3 on the same measurements. So this is known. So the lower city is all around us here, way beyond this slide. What we see here is only the upper city, the small section. The Canaanite palace over here. And what Solomon built is only half of the upper city. This is the gate that we just walked through, that my niece just walked through, with the 3 chambers and the tower. And the wall that is attached to it is a casement wall, a wall that has chambers. It is not full. 100 years after Solomon, the kingdom has split. It's not only Judea, it's Judea in the south and Israel to the north. And the greatest king of the north, Achav, rebuilds the city, makes it twice as big. He uses the original wall of Solomon to this point and then adds. So this section, this wall of Solomon, and of course the gate are useless now. And we see here very, very clearly, this is the casement wall. This is where the casement wall takes a corner. And this is here, the full wall is from the time of Achav, when he made the city much, much bigger. He had to strengthen the city. To the north of him was the kingdom of Aram, an eternal enemy, a nemesis. Achav had 3 or 4 different battles against Aram, in most of which he had victory. And the last battle against Aram is the battle that he died. So this is one of the cities that are at the border, at the frontier. It has to be much stronger and bigger and be fortified. He needed storages. He needed public buildings. And once again, if you traveled in Israel, you've seen such buildings in Megiddo, in Beersheba. These columns help support the ceiling because the structure is quite big and you can't have a ceiling that wide. Now, a secret is that these buildings actually, where the archaeologists found them, is where the useless piece of Solomon's wall and gate was. That's where they were found initially, since the gate wasn't needed anymore and the wall wasn't needed anymore there. At that point in the time of Achav, he built public buildings there. And because the archaeologists and the Nature Reserve Authority and the Antiquities Authority wanted us, the public today, the visitors today, to enjoy both Solomon's Gate and these public structures, they took them apart and they moved them a few yards aside. Okay, so they don't interfere with each other. Okay, and what was rebuilt here today is only one of a line of these public structures, and all of these findings that today are used as benches are from more and more and more of these storehouses. Next to the public houses, we find private dwellings. And not surprising, we find the 4-chamber house, Beit Arbaat HaMerchavim, which we find in almost every Israelite mound in Israel. 4-chamber, the courtyard is number 1, a room to the left, a room to the right, and a room to the back. And we see it over here, okay? The courtyard, a room to the left, a room to the right, and there's a back room over here. And we know that this is Israelite architecture, because everywhere in Israel where we find this architecture, there are no pig bones, or very, 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 very few pig bones. Now, if you look at the Phoenician culture, if you look at the Canaanite culture, if you look at the Philistine culture, their houses look different and they have pig bones. Okay, so we have a 1-to-1 match. When we find these chambers, we don't have pig bones, and we know that this is Israelite architecture. The economy based on olive oil, that is also no surprise. When they first reconstructed this olive press here, of course, what was found in the area was only the stone parts and the weights here. They reconstructed the wooden beam and they added the baskets, and to make sure that it works, they actually put some olive mush inside, and the olive oil started appearing, and the 3,000-year-old olive press was working again. And we can imagine the agricultural area around what today we saw as wheat fields, we can imagine it as olive orchards. The greatest structure, the greatest project that Achav built, except for fortifying the city itself, except for its walls, is the water system. A huge shaft in the center of the tell, in the center of the mound, going down tens of meters into the ground And once again, think of the engineers of ancient times not having the equipment that we have today, not having the ability to know where the underground water is and how deep they need to dig and how to strengthen the walls so they don't collapse inside. We know of similar systems, again, Beersheba, Gezer, Megiddo, Jerusalem, Givon, etc. The advantage that Hazor has opposing the others, that the spring of water is actually underneath the mound and not outside. They didn't have the protection problem that they had in Megiddo, in Jerusalem. They didn't have the fear that somebody's going to use the water system in order to sneak into the city from beneath. Today, going into the shaft, you use these modern metal steps, and which were built, they look ugly. They're in the middle of the structure. They're like destroying the view, but they were built to make sure that we don't use the ancient steps. If you look aside here, we see a glimpse of the ancient steps. Let's look closer. There's my niece going down. And again, we see here on the side, attached to the wall, and here much clearer. Look at what good conditions they are. Okay. Today, the Nature Reserve Authority, as the engineers of the ancient times, put a little canal on the side to make sure that when it rains, the water runs on the side and not on the steps themselves in order to keep them in functioning order. The one thing I have a question mark is about a railing. And another reason why we don't use the ancient steps today is because they wouldn't go through any security regulations and safety regulations. Oh, I don't know if people at that time had a railing or if they had a system that first people have to go down and then up again, because I can't imagine two people coming across each other with jugs of water. And we go down and down and down and down. And in this specific visit, we discovered that archaeologists were cleaning mud and sand that accumulated at the bottom. But as you can very well relate, they did not have the power or the energy or the will to schlep the buckets back up. And they needed volunteers. They actually put this, made this special sign here asking, are you willing, please take one bucket up with you, dear visitor, or two. So of course we helped them and we took our share of buckets up again. We are continuing to the very south of the Tell and close to the end of our story. Our time is almost done. And we mentioned Achav. We mentioned he had a few battles against the king of Aram. And in one of those battles, the king of Aram, Ben-Hadad, wants to negotiate with Achav and says, if you let me live, I will give you back some cities. But Achav doesn't surrender to the negotiation, and he continues with the battle, and he wins back Hazor. But after Achav, as we know, the Achav dynasty had to be ended. They're considered to be bad. He sinned too much. Jezebel, his wife, sinned too much. And whether it was geopolitics or whether it was the hand of God, with the help of the prophets Elijah and Elisha, the house of Omri, the house of Achav, ends. And archaeologically, what we know is that Hazael, the next king of Aram, he is the one that kills Yoram, the son of Achav, ends the dynasty, and he also makes the whole kingdom of Israel much, much smaller. He conquers a huge part of it. He actually goes all the way to Judah, and he manages to conquer even the city of Gat, which is in the lowlands, in the Shpela, and he even threatens Jerusalem. So although Hazor is not mentioned here specifically, We know for sure it was conquered by Hazael, and only after he died, then Yoash, the next king of Israel, managed to capture this part of Israel back. How do we know this? Again, from destruction signs that we found at Hazor, but the neighboring city, Dan, where the most famous stela was found with the inscription of the house of David. It was Hazael who conquered Dan and the cities next to it, including Hazor, who wrote that victory inscription saying, I am the greatest king and I beat Ahab. And we know later on that that stela was put as a part of a sidewalk, that Yoash came, reconquered Dan, said, I don't want this victory inscription of my enemy. So he reused it as pavement with the inscription facing down. So we can cross these two stories together. And Yoash and later on Yerovam II, again, re-strengthened, refortify Hazor. They built a fortress with this gate, and we know this kind of capital that is in our 5 shekel coin. And again, I'm in the Hazor section in the Israel Museum over here. But alas, these fortifications didn't hold too long, because somewhere around 830 BCE, 760 BCE, there was a huge earthquake. And this earthquake appears in the Bible several times, several references. We know that Amos speaks about 2 years before the earthquake. And this earthquake is so big that it goes into other prophecies, like when he mentions about will not the land tremble. And Zechariah, which is centuries later, also remembers the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, and we find these very clear evidence of the earthquake, of walls tilting in Hazor. So the next king, again, fixes up Hazor and refortifies it, but not for long. And 731, Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria. Till now, we were against a minor enemy from the north. Aram is a kingdom in the scale of Israel. And now comes the great enemy from the north, the empire, Assyria, the strongest army that existed till that time, and destroys the whole kingdom of Israel, and destroys Hazor to the point that it is not built again. 11 minutes too late. Maybe we should thank the history that it is not built again, because otherwise I would have to continue. But here, finally, I can end.
Thank you so much, Sharona. That was incredible. I always love how you compare the ancient text to what we're learning about and kind of bring it to light, but also show like inconsistencies and question marks. I felt like I was watching a mystery, like you said, a puzzle. So I'll go ahead and read. I think there's only a couple of questions that people wrote there, but it's possible that when we're done, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask questions. I know that Harry asked why so few visitors visiting the Tel Hazor even before October 7th. I hope you're doing better this week. And Gail answered him, I think, saying so many events are attributed to famous. Oh, no. Someone else answered him, saying that it's because of it's where it's located and that it's not safe right now.
Well, but before October 7th, obviously in the last 9 months, nothing is normal. You can't relate anything to what's been happening. But people did go all the way to Dan and Banyas. They're a half an hour away. And again, if you remember the size of the parking lot of Dan and Banyas, I'm just showing by the size of the parking lot the amount of people who come. It's a matter of public relations, of how much the Nature Reserve Authority invests in advertising. how many places there are to sit, how much shade there is, and how impressive are the antiquities you see. So many things that I showed you now need explanation for, as opposed to Roman antiquities of Caesarea that speak for themselves, a theater, okay? Bronze Age, you have to add an explanation to give life to the rocks, and not everybody comes with the guide.
Yeah, completely different when I've gone to these places with like just family and we're just looking at signage and what we're seeing. It's so incredibly different. This is why we need to go with you.
Or any other guide.
Yeah, or any guide.
Okay.
We're getting fascinating presentation. Phyllis said, is there any significance to the fact that in Judges 4, Yavin is called both Melech Hazor and Melech Canaan?
So I think I related to that. He's mentioned several times as the king of Canaan, and only once he is mentioned as king of Canaan that ruled in Hazor. He's okay, and again in the Hebrew, Asher Malach in the past tense, which is an irregular tense in that context. So perhaps one of the explanation is saying that the dynasty used to be in Hazor. That was our capital. Our capital, the subtext is that capital is destroyed and we are now ruling from some kind of other place.
Gail brought up a point that so many events are attributed to famous people instead of actual ones who did the event. Somebody did it. I think this is in terms of burning. Somebody did it and it was attributed to Joshua.
The thing is that it repeats once and once again. Okay, I don't think that's a coincidence. And not only he said he did not burn, that's sort of a useless phrase. Okay, you burned Hazor. Why do you have to say again none of the other places were burnt? Right. Why do you have to say that was burned all the way ad Choma? So it seems too much of a coincidence.
Yeah. People are asking for your contact information in case they have questions or want to travel with you.
Okay, so I will once again share the screen.
Great.
And this is my contact information.
I'll also, if you just leave it up for a minute, I will put it in the chat as well for those who don't know how to do a screenshot. Okay, and other than that, I'm just getting people saying how wonderful of a talk it was. I'm not sure whether they're just messaging me in particular, but you're getting a lot of praise in the personal chat. If anyone else has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
You have a question?
Yeah, Sharona, I have a practical question. Couple practical questions. When they're looking for water, is there any information about how they know where it is? Because you could dig forever in the desert.
Well, it's not the desert, but
I mean, not the desert in this area.
There are springs around, and there is the Nahal Hazor, the next riverbed or ravine. Again, saying riverbed in Israel is an exaggeration, but they see where the water flows in the winter compared to where the city is. So they probably have an assumption of how deep they need to go in order to reach the same level. I don't know if they can measure it in the same means that we measure today, or plan the shaft and then the tunnel. Maybe they made mistakes in the way. Maybe they tried several times until they reached
I'm sure
the solution that they knew, but they knew that there is water because they saw the water flowing the side of the tell.
Interesting. Another sort of a silly question, I guess. When they have the stone, they carve stone to leave information, all that early stuff you showed. Are there some which show errors? I mean, if you're carving something in the stone and you make a mistake, are there erasures? Or are these things, you're not going to start all over again with another stone?
You live with it.
Wow.
A
You
great
mean
question.
like the big lions? Okay, that's a question that's a great question. For any sculpture of any ancient time, think about all the Corinthic capitals of Roman cities. Okay, if you strike the hammer too strong and you take a pedal down, I mean, you have to start again. So I'm guessing that people who were masons worked on smaller scale and practiced a lot before they were given. Okay, and here I'm going to ask you, not Leonardo, what's his name? Okay, the
Michelangelo?
Michelangelo. Okay, before he took that piece of marble and started sculpturing David.
He said a prayer.
Okay, you have to be a professional before you, and we don't know how many broken Davids there are of Michelangelo. I mean, the question is relevant for how many of these people were given a second chance after they took their tail off?
That's a good.
We don't know. We don't know.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question?
Oh,
After-
thank you for answering the Fahrenheit. Okay.
Yeah, that's Harry's job. He looks stuff up.
Okay, but it's in the thousands, you know. After 40 centigrade, it's too hot, you know. So, okay. I'm going to let my cat and my two boys out of their locked rooms.
That makes sense. Thank you so much once again, Sharona. If anyone's interested, please contact her. Sharona, I didn't get a chance to put your email in the chat. I'll take if you put it up one last time, I'm just going to take a screenshot for myself and then I'll put all of your info. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So,
All right, thank you so
from
much.
Israel, good night.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Okay, so now we'll move into schmooze mode, where we discuss whatever's happening in our daily lives. You're welcome to stay or go, but the formal presentation is over.